Good morning. I think we are live.
Mm.
Let me know if you can hear me. Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. Hopefully you can hear me okay and see August Bradley here.
Hello, everyone.
Sorry, I just need to adjust my screen here so I can see the chat window okay. Cool. Let us know where you're coming in from. People are coming in from everywhere here. Philippines, Germany, Dallas, Netherlands. Amazing. We have lots of August fans today.
Oh my God. Hey, I'm going to run through my heater off. I forgot to turn it off.
Awesome. Go for it. Awesome. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Super excited for today's session. Sounds like lots of people here are pretty excited, which is awesome. If you've never been to an office hours before, we love to bring on other Notion nerds who are using Notion in really fun and interesting ways. So today's session, pretty timely, talking about rebooting your life. And if you've got, no worries. Your camera's a little bit blurry. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, just my little focus
trick. Perfect. Let us know. There's a poll down below too to see if you've ever been to an office hours. It's always fun to know if you've been here before. Ottawa, cool. I'm from Ottawa, Keith. Nice to see you. Cool. And also how long you've been using Notion too, because I know we've got a big range of here. People who've just started, some people who've been using it 1 to 3 months seems to be about the most common use case right now, which is interesting. And oh yeah, the votes are coming in. So about under a year is pretty the most common at the moment, which is cool. And 50-50 on whether or not people have been to Notion office hours before. So if you do have a question that pops up along the way, we just encourage you to use the ask a question area below so it doesn't get lost, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. Yeah, a lot of us are trying to convert all of our friends. That's why we make YouTube videos, right? To convert all of our friends and clients. Amazing. So August Bradley is a fellow Notion user, productivity consultant, operations and business consultant. So August, I'd love to hear kind of a little bit about your journey into Notion and kind of how it became sort of one of your core productivity tools.
Okay, yeah, it really grabbed me quickly. And I mean, surprisingly quickly, because usually I'm skeptical of new tools and I take a lot of time, and especially when I'm putting it into actual production, not just experimenting. Yeah. But Notion came in really fast for me, which is unusual. So I've had a long gradual evolution. I've had a wide range of career shifts throughout my entire journey. But all along the way, I've always been really fanatical about systems and processes and efficiency, often way beyond what my little company at the time might have justified. But I was planning for that big growth and I was ready for it.
Over-engineering it, yeah.
But through that process, I discovered a couple things. One is how to do it, how to really put things in place. And then when I got into larger organizations that had VC funding and stuff, then it really was able to shine. Like it was able to take better advantage of it than some of my other efforts that didn't, get the traction that I'd hoped. But in experimenting with systems in different contexts helps you learn a lot about what works and what doesn't. And it's very context dependent to the system you use. So you have to be able to recognize what environment needs what kind of system. So I learned that along the way. But perhaps the biggest thing I learned along the way was how much I loved systems and processes and optimization. Like it was really satisfying to me, even when I put a really elegant system in place and didn't get the growth I needed to let it shine. It was still really rewarding to figure that out.
Put things in order.
It's a puzzle, and it's rewarding. It's a kind of creativity. So solving those kinds of problems. So I just found I loved that. And after a while, and a wide range of positions, kind of culminating as a COO of a startup with venture capital funding in the virtual and augmented reality space, where I was really looking at systems and processes. I realized I just love doing that, and I just had the epiphany: why don't I just do that for companies? That can be my product rather than a back end part of something else I was trying to do. So and that led to working with more and more companies as a coach and consultant, implementing practices, sometimes focusing on automation, sometimes focusing on systems and processes, but always optimizing for growth, for internal efficiency, for maximizing margin, all that stuff. So I tend to work with business owners, though more and more lately, especially as I've been sharing my work more broadly, I've been working with some individuals too, and that's rewarding as well. So I just discovered I love doing it. So now I am working with a broader range of people and organizations implementing that.
It's like fun to do the work, but then also fun to teach other people to be better at doing that for themselves.
It is. And if you're doing it for other people, you can do more of it.
Absolutely.
You implement one good system for yourself that you shouldn't be changing it constantly anyway.
Right. It's sort of, I think that can be the danger of Notion too, is sort of getting to the point where you like over engineer something and it becomes too complex and it's not useful. So do you see that where people kind of have just gone a little too far and you kind of scale it back?
For sure. And like I said, I love it. So I'm I'm very susceptible to that. But at the same time, that's how you learn. You have to do some of that. Like you can't, if you don't do any of that, you're not going to learn it well enough to figure it out and solve the problem. So there's some of that, unless you hire someone to help you with that. But in most cases, you really should get a pretty good basic understanding yourself, and then you can work with others with it more easily. But yeah, but it's hard to draw that line, because in the beginning you have to kind of go down some dead ends. You have to try some things that don't work. That's part of the process of learning.
For sure.
But ultimately it's a means to an end, not an end in itself.
Yeah.
So it's important to sort of check yourself and say, okay, let's put this in motion. But part of the fun is seeing it in motion with a real business or a real life. And today we're talking about rebooting life, beyond business, and seeing it humming smoothly and putting those guide rails on and giving you the focus and the alignment you need is incredibly rewarding. In fact, I find it's ultimately more rewarding to see it in action in real life and in real business than the experiments and the test, stuff you set up.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this before, how Notion is not opinionated, right? It's so open-ended. And so I think it's helpful to see some structures that work, right? So I think you coming on and being able to show, like, here's a structure that you can implement in your own Notion space, I think it's a good starting point to see systems that work. And then you can always kind of adjust and tinker and make it yours.
That's the fundamental point about Notion, though. And that's why I think it is radically transformative. It is not like any software I've ever seen before. It is a true generation shift in software, in that it doesn't have a point of view, as you said. That's an eloquent way to say it. But really, on a fundamental level, it doesn't have a system. It doesn't have a process. Every other productivity tool, whether it's a team project management thing like Asana or a personal thing like Todoist, they have a way to do it, and then you learn their method and you do it. Notion is none of that. You have to build a system. And I don't actually think Notion is that hard to learn. It's a little overwhelming at first, but you can pick it up fast. I mean, within a week or so, if you commit to it. But then you don't know what to do with it. The harder part is having what to do with it. And that's what you and I are here to talk more about. But
awesome.
It's almost like, it's a little bit more like a programming language than an application. It's somewhere in between. But that's what's different from everything else I've ever used, is that you can shape it to be what you want. You can kind of create your own app.
Yeah. And I find there's almost two camps. There's I love that about it, I can do anything. And there's why can't it be ready for me? And so I'm curious if you think there are some people that are not well suited to Notion inherently, just because maybe it doesn't align with the way they think or the way they want to. I just want it to work when I log in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not for everybody, and not everybody wants to build their own system. There are some real inherent advantages to it, but it does take more time and more startup and more figuring it out. Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with using Asana or Todoist or Things or OmniFocus, any of those things. They're great apps, and they work. And if you want to go with an established system, they're there for you, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But if you want to build a system, there are some real advantages to custom tailoring a system to you. And as you go, to be modifying it and changing it as you change, as different phases of your life change, as different cycles of your workflow change. It's incredibly powerful to be able to change it with you.
Big time. So that's what I love about it. We have had a couple of questions that have popped in, I think might be somewhat relevant to kind of before we dive in, but Danny was asking, why did you decide to record your Notion setups and put them on YouTube? Glad you did.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're glad I did. But first of all, I just love putting things out, and I love video production. One of my companies was one of my longer running companies was a video film production company for TV commercials and brand films for internet. So I just love production. So it's sort of a passion of mine. And I've been having a long running visual based podcast, which is sort of an interview series with leaders at the forefront of technologies and science that enhance human capability, and sort of futurist technologies applied towards enhancing human capability. It's called Mind and Machine. So it's also on YouTube and on a podcast. And I put the whole production system together for that. And I've been doing that for over 3 years now. So I had the whole setup. And then I've been coaching clients on implementing processes and systems for better performance, both for small businesses and for themselves personally. And so through that, I had been bringing Notion to a lot of clients, and I built out this system that was really transformative for my life and just really empowered what I'm capable of doing. And then I started sharing it with them, and I saw the same results with them. I mean, like with eerie consistency. So I was like, this is really changing
something
people's
here.
lives. This is doing things for people.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I love video production, and I have this thing that I'd really love to share with more people. So it seemed like the two were a perfect combination.
Amazing. I mean, there's lots more questions that have popped in, but I feel like, why don't we kind of dive into your specific setup and even talking about, what it means to reboot your life in this time, maybe what's changing for people, and are you noticing even changes with your own clients as they're approaching you during this time? Are you, like, for yourself or for your clients, are people more busy? Are they less busy? Like, it feels like time is more precious than ever, and we're having to be just so mindful of like the very few hours that we have, and being really focused with that time we do have. So I'd just be curious to kind of hear, what you've noticed, and maybe how it's impacted your Notion workspace, if it has.
Right. Well, so the thing I hear most, my business is well suited, and it's all digital, it's all video. So I'm fortunate in that regard. But even among people like that, you see a rise in anxiety, like a serious spike in anxiety. It's just unavoidable with the news that's coming in and these just bizarre circumstances we find ourselves in, in the midst of this global pandemic. So that's in the best of cases that you just have anxiety, which is bad enough. But a lot of people have a lot more than anxiety to deal with. They've got family crises. I mean, and that's assuming you're not sick, which is increasing the problem in and of itself. Or family members. So you've got family members you have incredible concern for. You have work. I mean, there's been sort of a backlash on this productivity, how to work from home stuff, and saying, no, we can't be focusing on making money now. But making money is a part of survival, and in providing for your family is essential. I mean, this is not just a nice to have. This is a necessity. Yeah. So anxiety is real, and some people have a lot more than anxiety, which is why I thought this would be a good topic to dive into, because these platforms, while they're fantastic for everyday life, they can really turn things around when things are really going off the rails, when things are in disaster state. And in some ways, that's when you need them most, things are at their worst. So we'll talk about how to put them in place at that point where they're at their worst or seeming like they might get better. But the more chaos, the more helpful systems are in your life. So I find that that's just,
here.
It's and then in that case, it's not procrastination. It's putting into fundamental processes in your life that are going to get you to where you want to be and get you to be the person you want to be. That's ultimately the objective here.
Love that.
So we can go on and on about that, but that's definitely the context we find ourselves in here. And it seems like it's going to get worse. But I would say the first step of productivity and performance in the midst of a really high anxiety situation is to turn down the amount of news you're consuming. I think before you do anything, that is just energy burning with no productive output. It's all doom and gloom, and you don't need that much of it. You can keep an eye on it. I have a window in the morning where I'll read the headlines, and then a window late in the afternoon where I'll just read the headlines and try not to read articles, try not to go any deeper unless there's something really critical. I mean, you have to know the regional guidelines for where you're living. But for the most part, we can turn down the amount of news we're consuming on the crisis and still be aware of what's going on, but focus on things we have control over, things that we can make a difference on. And that's true at any time, but it's especially true now when we are surrounded and bombarded by this news that we just can't do anything about. And you're aware of it after the first few headlines. You don't need to read the 15th and 16th one. It's just more of the same. Because we get in these patterns, these mental loops where we just obsess over the same thing. We tell ourselves the same story over and over, and it just beats us down, but it doesn't progress. Like if you were having a conversation with someone and the other person was saying what you were saying in your head, the redundancy, the endless negative cycle, like it'd be the most insane conversation. You would just tune this person out, but yet we do it to ourselves incessantly. So we need to first stop listening to this from the outside, and then we need to stop the loop of just obsessing on negative thoughts. And this can be about negative news cycles, or it can be about negative thoughts about ourselves. And that's where meditation comes in, and that's part of the system. That meditation teaches you to notice when you're in a thought loop that's just not moving anywhere, and by recognizing it, you can break it. Awareness makes a huge difference. But you want to bring things into your Notion system that foster those kinds of behaviors, like meditation, that break negative feedback loops and enable positive feedback loops.
I'm curious if when the clients are hiring you to kind of set up their spaces, are you bringing those things in? So whether or not they have a meditation habit, you're like, hey, do you have, I really recommend this system. And so are you helping them with more of that personal development, even if they come to you on the business side of things? I'm curious.
Well, historically, over the past year, prior to launching this channel, most people didn't come to me for Notion because nobody knew I was a Notion guy. They came to me to solve life problems and business problems, and then I bring Notion to them. But increasingly, people are coming to me now for Notion specifically, which is great, and I'm super excited about that. It sort of saves me a step of trying to tell them why they need to take this seriously. We can get into it faster. But yeah, I mean, some clients come explicitly just for business, especially if it's a larger company, and then less so. But if it's a business owner or someone part of a small company, then inevitably it should be a part of the system, because our lives, especially in a small business, if you're a business owner or even a solopreneur, your business and your life are so intertwined, you really can't separate them. I used to implement system efficiency for businesses with owners and small businesses, but we put the system in place, but their lives were such a chaotic mess. It wouldn't work. They were the problem. So now with a small company, I need to implement with both at the same time, the personal lives of either the business owner or one of the leaders who bring me in, and the company itself. But when you get them humming together, it is truly transformative. I don't dwell on it. I mean, some people are ready for it and some people aren't. I'm not going to get them over there.
Well, should we dive in? And do you want to give us a bit of a tour of your setup and kind of how it all comes together? And
for sure, but I definitely want to put in the context of rebooting during hard times, because it'll have significant payoffs anytime, but it'll particularly have payoffs during those times. And I mean, ideally you have it in place before those times hit, but if you haven't, then you didn't, and now is the best time to start. The second best time to start is now. The best time was yesterday, right?
Exactly.
It's perpetually the case. So is my screen at a good dimension?
Yeah, let us know how the resolution and sort of zooming is okay for you guys.
I'm not actually seeing the broadcast of my screen, though of course I see the actual window. So I don't need to see it. But let me know if the screen broadcast isn't looking right.
Looking good, yeah.
So fundamentally, the whole system is about two things: focus and alignment. So everything works because of the emphasis on those two things. Focus, looking at and having your attention brought to what matters at any given moment. What matters now is my favorite question. Not what matters most, but what matters most now. So at any given moment of the day, I want my attention brought to what matters most. And then the other half is alignment, so that the things you're doing minute to minute, hour by hour, day to day, are well aligned with the broader visions and goals and objectives in your life. And that latter part is more what we're going to talk about today, sort of identifying what matters most to you and who you want to become, and then aligning everything from that higher aspirational level down to the minute by minute, hour to hour actions. And that's what this dashboard, what I call my alignment zone, is all about. I've got 2 pages in my system that are most important and most used. The one that I'm in most often is called the action zone. And that's about day-to-day, minute-to-minute action. That has everything funneling down for focus. But for alignment, and that's what we want to talk about today when we're trying to reboot our lives, is get that alignment in place. I've got this system here. which I'll get into. And the one thing I just want to have a caveat on and elaborate a little bit more on is this idea of feedback loops. To me, the entire point of any system, whether it's for a business or your personal life, is to generate the right kinds of feedback loops and stop the wrong kinds, because feedback loops can build you up to be just a powerhouse that can do anything, or they can crush you, they can destroy you. And a feedback loop is fundamentally a series of cycles where the end of each cycle, it pours more energy, momentum, and resources into the next cycle. So the next cycle starts stronger and then builds, and then at the end pours more energy, momentum, and resources into the cycle after that. And you get this upward spiral that just gets stronger and stronger. And when you're trying to build habits and build processes that are making you better, making you smarter, making you more capable, you're trying to have a system that facilitates these upward feedback loops. But at the same time, feedback loops can be negative. You can have negative thoughts and negative impulses, and each cycle makes you worse off than the previous one, and it's a downward loop. So you not only need to build cycles that build you up, you need to identify cycles that are breaking you down and stop them. So I think a good system, whether it's Notion or any system, facilitates the right feedback loops and identifies and helps stop the negatives. So that's what all of this is trying to do. So with that caveat, let's get into Notion here.
Awesome.
So I also like to have, I try to get it down to these two boards because I like to have everything in one place. And I'm big on toggles, which is like such a little thing, but it makes such a big difference. And by doing that, I can open any combination of things together or just have one thing. So I have the option for focus, the option on focus on any combination of elements on the dashboard. So I hear you agreeing with that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think the thing that drove me the crazy with Asana was just it felt like some things were easily buried, and it would take you like a couple of clicks and then you're outside of the context. And so I just love the ability to see only what you want to any given time. Love it.
Yeah. But let's put them into practice here. So I've got the upper area is called Insight, and below that I have what I call the pillar to pipeline pyramid. So Insight is about self-awareness and self-understanding. You have to have self-awareness, especially to break out of a hard time, because our minds are really good at deceiving ourselves. We can trick ourselves into anything. We can justify anything. We're really good at that. And you need to take that illusion off of our vision. And it's true of everybody. Nobody's exempt from this. So you need to go to make an effort to really see yourself clearly and understand who you are and what you want and who you have to become to get what you want. Excuse me, because a lot of times we're not actually capable of getting what we want right now. We're not the person who can get that. And it's frustrating because we want that, but it never happens. If we were the person now who could get what we want, we would have it. Like we would have done it. But there's something in us that's not delivering. So we need to assess ourselves and understand who we need to become in order to be the person that can achieve what we're reaching out to achieve. And this could be anything. This could be on health and fitness. This could be on family and relationships. This could be on business. And then another important part is prioritizing what matters most. And I think everybody needs to start with health and wellness, because if your body is not in tune, everything else will suffer, everything else. And if your mind doesn't have clarity, I mean, working in a haze and a fog is just, it's just 3, 4, 5 times as hard. So even if your priority is family, which is super admirable, right? I mean, it's a caring about other people. If you don't like put your mask on first, you can't help them as much as you could otherwise. So you need to take care of yourself, especially in times of crisis. It's so easy to think, okay, I lost my job, I need to make money. But if you're not taking care of yourself, that's going to be exponentially harder. So everything I think starts with physical fitness. In these times of crisis, I think you need to start the reboot by exercising every day, meditating, or doing some kind of mindfulness where you take your mind off of the racing thoughts, the fear of the future, the regret of the past, and fantasies that are just spinning out of control, and just completely be present in the moment. You're okay right now. You're okay. You got a roof over your head. You've eaten today. You're okay. Just realize that and get to a centered point. And you've got to do exercise in these periods of lockdown. You cannot just become sedentary. It becomes more important. So start there. But I start with insight and guiding principles, which is kind of the point. And I think of this as a pyramid. the top of the pyramid is the most narrow and focused and precise, and the least things competing. At the bottom, you have action items, which are what I call tasks. So this is the task database, basically. And you have the most items, the most minute pieces in the greatest volume. And it's just a pyramid, a funnel up there. So from action items, go to projects, to goals, to what I call life pillars. And it all starts with the guiding principles. So I'm going to open the guiding principles here. And this is where the self-understanding and self-awareness starts, and where that self-reflection sort of culminates. And a good place to start here is you basically need to go through a process of questioning and examining who you are and what you want to be. And a lot of the past, or one or two of the past office hours, and I know, Marie, you have a video on your own YouTube channel about the annual review. The process of doing the annual review is very similar to the process of doing any assessment at any point throughout the year. I don't think you need to hold that back for an annual review, especially those of you who said you were going to do it and didn't do it. And I know you're out there because I used to be one of those people. But yeah, your past efforts there, and you had an episode with Valentine Perez that was really good place to start in terms of the self-assessment. And you've also recommended Susan Conway. And I followed your suggestion there and got a lot of great insights from her annual review process as well. So we start by asking questions. And what I try to do is I do the annual review, which I'll get to in a moment. But if I hadn't, or even if you have, and things change as much as they have recently, it's time to go back and redo that to figure out who I am in the changed environment. So by going through that annual review process at any time, you come to these guiding principles, which to me start more actionable on top and become a bit more abstract at the bottom, but more sort of fundamental and primal. So just to give some examples, you go through the process, and this would be the result of your process, coming to these understandings. So throughout the year, I have what I call a state of being, and this is the end of that review process. But I want to give you a sense of where we're going to when we go through the annual review type of assessment. I come out with one single word that's a state of being. This can change throughout the year. I have periodic reviews where I'll consider changing it, but it could last for the whole year. This year, my state of being is rising. Now, no matter what your circumstances are, you need a positive state of being, because this is the one word you go back to as you're assessing everything. Is this in alignment with my state of being? My state of being now is rising. So if I had a horrible day that doesn't feel consistent with that, I remind myself, but my state of being at this period is rising. So I need to put myself in that framework. And then you can go through the rest of this, and it builds up to that. My process is focus and alignment. That is everything about my system is about those two objectives. What do I need to work on, or be looking at exclusively at a given moment to advance the cause? And how is that aligned up through my values and aspirations? And then, manifested through various areas here. So business, my more time per day is the name of my company. And this period in particular, I'm really excited about and focus on engaging with community. That's what the YouTube channel is about, and a lot of my activities lately. Health has always got to be part of it. So I've identified, weight goals, performance goals in terms of running, swimming, and cycling, which are the sports I do. Some of them are a little bit harder these days. And mental clarity is so fundamental to health, and it's easily overlooked. So I very clearly define what I want to achieve here. I want to achieve and maintain peak mental clarity through good sleep, ongoing learning efforts, and high quality informational inputs. So you don't start here, you end here with these very tightly defined objectives or states of consciousness. But I want you to see where you end up, so that when you go through the process, you understand what you're trying to achieve. Then drive and motivation, help, what drives me, what makes me do what I do. And for me, it's a deep satisfaction with creating something worthwhile. I've got a bunch of personal family ones that I put in toggles just because they're personal. I don't want to help people that didn't volunteer to be on the podcast. But a lot of my stuff is very personal family, as yours should be too. But then I have other ones that are like thrill of discovery. It really drives me. Curiosity. I'm a super curious person. Desire for elegant design and intrinsic fit, systems and aesthetics. I just really find this rewarding sense after I put systems in place or I've had periods doing very artistic things. So to me, an elegant system is aesthetically pleasing. So these are things that are very personal to me and things I've discovered by going through this question and answer series. There you go. So purpose and why. It's getting a little bit more abstract, but still very tightly defined. Impact on others at scale through life-enhancing ideas and inspiring aesthetics. Again, this is what I want to do. This is why I do the things I do. Life experiences that touch the root of being, like those profound experiences I'm constantly in pursuit of. And then really the big one here is the foundational core. And this is, again, it comes through a lot of work and reflection to come to this, but I've come to the conclusion that like the things at my core are, I want to experience the deepest threads of life through the most capable mind and body I can create. Again, your mind and body have to be in good shape in order to do everything else. I want to maximally love and support the people I'm closest to and empower broader circles of people with as much impact as possible, and embrace, foster, champion mindful, thoughtful, caring, and artistic values. Be courageous, stay true, create maximum value, and be useful. So I'm spending a lot of time emphasizing this because you need a really good sense of who you are and who you want to be in order to build a system that's going to get you there. It doesn't just happen by accident. And if you don't know what you're aiming at, it's pretty unlikely you're going to get to the place you really want to be. So this seems really simple and easy to blow off, but it really is the foundation of everything. And because that's the foundation of everything, we have this whole alignment zone, which channels everything to that point of the pyramid. So let's get into this. Down here is execution. The pillar to pipeline pyramid is all about execution. But while we're still up in the insight area, cycles are my reviews. So I've got annual reviews, quarterly reviews, weekly reviews. Daily isn't so much reviews, but daily is documentation, it's data tracking. It's recording day to day the metrics, the key metrics that I've identified that will reveal whether I'm moving closer to my guiding principles and my pillars or further away. They are the metrics that let me know whether things are working or not working. And it's a bit of a ritual to enter those every morning and update them at night. So just very quickly, because we could spend weeks talking about this. And I know I think I need to speed up a little bit. Annual plan and insight is the annual reviews. There are great sources for this. We don't have time to go into it, but I'll just give you a really quick glimpse. I've got this board I go through, this series of questions and check boxes. I will plan this is designed for the annual review, but you could do this now in a time of radical change. Assess the past year. First I assess the past year, and then I assess the upcoming year. So it's a lot of questions for the upcoming year. It's like, where am I? Where have I been? What do I want to achieve? These questions came from a lot of great sources. I basically pulled together the greatest hits of things from other annual reviews that resonate with me. And Marie, you were a big influence on this, as were many people in the Notion community and many people out of it. So just put together your greatest hits of questions, assessing what they'll help you dig into who you are and who you want to be. And then you do it for looking back in the past, say 12 months, and then in the next 12 months. And you're going to discover so much about yourself. And then that gets funneled into the guiding principles. So that's annually. But I also do quarterly and monthly insights. And these are my reviews. So at the end of every month, I will sit down and do an assessment of how that month went, what worked, what didn't work. And it's a checklist. And then I'll do the same thing at the end of each quarter, and I'll do the same thing at the end of each week. Now, that sounds like a lot of work. Like, how are you going to find time for all that? Well, first of all, each of them, none of them repeats the other. There's no redundancy across them. So you break down the things you want to assess and review across them. So all of the longest ones take 20 to 30 minutes. The shortest one is the quarter, and then that takes maybe even 10, 15 minutes. But you're spreading out the work across these different reviews. So you're not like looking at a 3-hour project, which would be daunting, and you would just keep putting it off and never do it. But weekly, you need to do it every week. This is the key to the system. This keeps the train on the tracks. And this is what, when things start going askew, pulls it back in. It is the most important thing. And I know it's often the hardest thing to start and keep with, but once you get into it, it's super rewarding. So let's say my weekly insights here. I'm at the end of the weekly review. This is the current week here. And I've gone through it a lot of cleanup I've been doing since my YouTube channel started. So a lot of stuff's hidden. So this isn't everything, but this is enough to give you a peek into what I'm doing. And in some cases, I have sort of demo boards with demo numbers.
Yeah.
But this is this week, so this is not finished. But I'm going through, and at the beginning of each week, I will say what's my objective for this week and what's my focus. Right now, I'm doing a lot of media production and increasingly marketing. The past week, it was purely media production and content. The past few weeks, I've been focused on content. Now I'm focusing more on client outreach. But I've also got a lot of connections to other databases. And the most important one in this case, and this is how the alignment board is all connected. Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?
I was just like, oh, disappointments. I'm curious where this is going. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is taking the full advantage of Notion.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the alignment board aligned, is that the entire action pyramid is interconnected. And we're going to get more into that in a moment here. But we already start seeing it. So each day when I do a daily tracking item, so let me go back up down to the daily tracking. Every single day, and I'm just going to open the whole database here. Every single day I enter a new day. And all right, let me just jump in. This is going to be a little confusing, but this is the daily zone where I actually enter it. And I'll have today open. Now for today, I have the items pre-sorted by the night before in priority of what I'm going to do today. And then underneath it, I have the daily tracking filtered to only show me today. So I have the one slice for today. So I hit new, and because it's filtered for today, it's automatically going to fill in today's date. And then I'll go through and fill this out. And this looks long, but I can do it in under 60 seconds. I've got a dial that's in order from the apps that collect the data. I have an Aura Ring that collects sleep data, a Withing scale that collects some biometrics, and my Apple Watch. And you don't need that, though. You could just document when you go to sleep and wake up. But basically, you want to track data that's going to tell you whether you're succeeding. Are you getting the sleep you need? Are you hitting your fitness goals? It could, in mine, typically it's filtered out here, but it's business goals. How many people have I communicated with about potential projects? How many, whatever metric is an indicator of you moving towards your objectives. And so this I can fill out, the part that's morning only, I can fill out in under 60 seconds very quickly. And I've got a whole video on this if you want to go deeper into this. In fact, all of these sections of my system, my YouTube channel is entirely about going section by section of this particular system. And then at the bottom, I've got the daily journal, basically. I was doing this in paper for a long time, but I finally brought it into Notion. I've got the morning startup, and then I've got the end of the day wind up or wind down. And I start with the gratitude. One thing for me, I know a lot of people do three things, but to me, 3 things feels like a list. One thing I focus on and I internalize, and I connect with it more if I just do one gratitude and no repeating, at least within the same quarter. Then what will make today great? It's a common question, but it is so powerful. It is the single, if I can give anybody one recommendation on how to be more productive, ask yourself and write down every day what would make today great. And to me, if I complete this 1, 2, or 3 things, then today was a success. That is the criteria that determines whether today was a success.
It's like a way to prime your brain, right? Because then you're already thinking about how to actually follow through on that during the day.
And it's so easy to have a huge list of things to do, but if I finish these 2 things, then we succeeded. Everything else is a nice to have. A not to do list, which is based on, at the end, you'll see I have improvements on the previous day. So I look at the previous day's improvements, and I will build a not to do list today to guide me to avoid what needed improvement yesterday. Mindset, I have a whole page about mindset practice here, and I'm going to do a whole video on this, but it's long, and I figure out what part I want to go through on any given day. There's no way of going through this each day, but every single day I'll spend a little bit of time on one section of this, reviewing ideas and thoughts that inspire me or guide me in some way. And I've collected these from a wide range of sources as well. So
I love that.
You see things that resonate with you as impactful, and you just know these are true. If I can live my life that way, it's going to make a meaningful impact on me. I put it all into one page, and every single day as part of my startup routine, I will spend time in one section of that page. And
I love that.
And then visualization, every single day, I will close my eyes and visualize on something coming up that I want to do well at. So most cases, it's executing my plan for the day. Because every morning, the night before, every day, I plan the next day's priorities and sequence of things I'm going to do. So some mornings I'll just visualize myself perfectly executing on that day. But if I have something coming up, like a big presentation or a sales pitch or something, then I'll visualize going through the experience of that thing and visualize myself doing it perfectly. And like in the beginning, when I was doing the YouTube videos, especially with my previous show, I would, I was noobing in front of the camera. So before doing it in the morning, I would visualize myself delivering what I wanted to deliver perfectly. So visualization is super powerful and underutilized. And if it sounds hokey, just dismiss that thought, because it is super powerful. I recently did an episode on Mind and Machine with Anders Ericsson, who wrote the book Peak. And he talks about how peak performance is all about building mental models. And mental models are representations in your mind of any scenario you can encounter. If you have visualized a scenario, you've built a mental model for it. And when you encounter that scenario, you're ready for it. You know how to act. You sort of, like you said, primed yourself, and you've built the neural connections. I mean, the way we learn is our mind literally builds physical connections based on certain behaviors or activities. And visualization is a way to build those neural networks without even having yet actually experienced that condition. At least you can build those networks to some extent. And so the more you do that, especially for things you know are going to come up in your day or your week, it's super powerful. So the combination of what would make today great and visualization are like my top 2 recommendations for someone who just wants something right off the bat to improve.
And August, maybe you can comment on like I just noticed a comment that came in that said, I think August's system is inspiring, but it's designed for his mindset, so difficult to implement in others as it is. And I'd be curious to kind of riff on that, because I personally always think it's so helpful just to see the way other people think, and I can really see how mindful you are about the way that you work, and your system is so crafted to help you continue to become a more mindful person. And I don't think necessarily, applying your exact system as is necessarily useful, but I think there's something to be learned from the system. And, again, even if it's just that mindset and identity sculpting, or just tracking or reducing the noise that can kind of improve your system, it doesn't have to be adopting exactly what is working in someone's setup. But I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
100%. Yes. I mean, and that's how I built this system, by listening to others, and I mean, not just Notion builders, but those too, yourself very much included, but other thinkers across a wide range of fields. And I've taken not everything any of them taught, but pieces that really resonated with me. And whether or not it resonates with you is a good indication of whether or not, it's right for you.
Yeah,
it's not like this is good for you, it doesn't resonate with you, but I need to do it because everyone says it's good for you. No, pick the things that resonate, because those are going to mean something to you and you're going to do them. And there are plenty of things that will resonate with you that are meaningful. There's no shortage of that. You just have to expose yourself to enough ideas. And so what we're doing here is, this is one exposure to a set of ideas, and you take what's useful for you. Even when I work with clients, I'm not imposing my system on them. I'm presenting the ideas in my system, but I've also encountered a wide range of ideas that didn't resonate so much with me, but I thought were at an intellectual level meaningful and good, and I could see how they would be helpful to others. I present those ideas to clients all the time, even though they weren't something that I thought made sense in my system. So yeah, exposure to ideas is what this is all about. For you to select the things that you think are going to drive you to be who you want to be and achieve the things you want to achieve. That's what this is all about, is seeing examples so that you can pick and choose and build your own system. And that's why Notion's so great, is it doesn't have that forced point of view. You can build your own system, around your own preferences, but being exposed to best practices lets you pick the best practices that are the right fit for you. So absolutely. I mean, none of this is, an edict, and no system is right for everybody. So
yeah, and I think it's easy to look at like really advanced setups and be like, I don't know, that's overwhelming. Like mine grew into something more advanced. I didn't just start with that. That would have been completely overwhelming. So I think starting by tracking what matters, and I know like a lot of this planning stuff, it's like it is really easy to do on a day-to-day when things are going well. But I am curious, how did your quarterly plans or weekly plans, like did they go out the window when you're like, oh well crap, like things have changed, and maybe doing that outreach doesn't make sense anymore, or like maybe that plan needed to shift. And so I'm curious for you, how much of that sort of was like, oh, those quarterly plans doesn't quite feel right.
Because of the current crisis, do you mean? Or
yeah, coronavirus.
Yes, a lot's changed. I mean, I had intentions of actually reaching out to people who I thought would be a really good fit. I mean, direct sales, I think I've just tossed out the window because, this is not the time to be pitching things. So I'm focused on sharing right now, and that's ironically actually bringing in more response than direct sales ever did. So in some ways you even learn things like that. But yeah, I mean, again, my business is well suited for this kind of lockdown, which is, fortunate. If I had a restaurant, obviously it would change things a lot more. But if I had a restaurant or I had a business completely dependent, that it was actually just shut down and I couldn't do, that would be a time for me to look at maybe diversifying a side business that's more internet based, or just exploring it as a possibility. I mean, if you can't open your restaurant or you can't open your clinic of whatever type it is, you can explore what might ultimately be a side business, or perhaps you have something you are more passionate about and you were just doing that because it had revenue and it was established. But this might be an opportunity to jumpstart something new that you had in the back of your mind, but you didn't, you were too busy and you were too practical to really consider it. This might be the kind of jolt to the system that makes that actually the practical thing to try. Some business where you share your knowledge, or even just some act of generosity that you make publicly available, starting a community of people to share concerns and worries, not maybe with no business motive at all, or maybe with, either way. But these kinds of jolts to the system are the ideal time to assess. And that's what this process of questioning and learning about yourself is, finding what would be most meaningful to you if you could do anything right now. And then perhaps looking at the environment and saying, in this environment of limited options, what would actually be functional right now? And through that process of reflection, you could find something that's more meaningful to you than what you were doing and viable in this context, regardless of how long this context lasts. So that process leads to these kinds of insights. Does that get to the nature of the question?
I think so. I mean, there's been an interesting range of comments here. Elizabeth said, I was expecting more Notion ideas of rebooting what you might already be working on. Rebooting
Notion?
Like ideas structure? Of how to reboot stuff, maybe things you were already working on that now suddenly have changed. But I feel like your question answered that. But Elizabeth, let us know if we can clarify.
Yeah, my business isn't radically changing, other than, like everyone, I'm dealing with more anxiety, and the people I'm working with have a lot more anxiety and concern. Mm-hmm. So it becomes more about psychological frameworks in managing that than the more traditional business structures or life structures. But perhaps you should, a big part of this is identifying priorities as well. And so the priorities could very clearly shift toward family, toward relationships. We're locked down, we can't hang out with people. Maybe we need to make extra effort to reach out to people through video or phone calls. And that can all be designed in the system. You're still setting priorities, goals, and tasks that are you're prioritizing. That's what the system does. It prioritizes so you know where to apply your focus. And so the shift would be in the choices within the system. Not the system itself wouldn't change, but the choices you make in applying the system would certainly change.
Yeah.
It's hard to know if that's helpful without just watching the comment scroll.
Yeah, that's tough.
Let me finish this quickly, but I think when I get to the pyramid, it actually gets more into that as well. So just the last thing is I have this habit tracker. This is kind of interesting from a Notion implementation standpoint. This is the strip of today of the daily tracking, but we are inside that actual strip. So this is super meta. This is the one we created, this new one. But this is a strip where I fill out at the end of the day anything I hadn't checked off that I had completed. Say I complete my visualization, my meditation. I already had one, and this is the new one I'm creating, but we are inside this page that we're now looking at from the outside on the table. But it just lines it up, and these check boxes I'm doing here are checking off up above. But because I want to encounter it in sequence, this gives me a place to check it off as I'm going through the system. And same thing at the bottom when I list today's wins, then I look at improvements that I could have made today better. And again, this I'll type in, say, eat better. Well, that's entering it right up here. but it's letting me go through the sequence in order, and then it completes my daily tracking. So I come out of here and we go back to the alignment zone. But that is how I, on a day-to-day, implement toward the greater visions. And these weekly and monthly and quarterly reviews, keeping them manageable so that they don't become overwhelming, keeps everything on track. But when we get down to the pillar of the pipeline pyramid, this is where execution happens. So this is where the change would happen. I'm not changing the pyramid, but I'm changing the choices made within the pyramid. We've got the action items, which are breakdowns of projects, which is pretty common. The projects are breakdowns of goals. And I'll talk about how I split my goals up into 2 categories here. And then I have the pillars. The pillars are the life, the ongoing things that keep the roof up, that keep the lights on, and that are taking you to be the person you want to be. So these are every single thing in the entire pyramid here is in support of one of these pillars. Every action item, every project, every goal is delivering on one of these pillars. And these are all of my pillars. So it's really narrowed down to the central things: learning, health and fitness, business. So it's all under the 3 categories: growth, business, or home life. And everything boils down to this. And I want to make sure everything is moving and advancing. Then backing down. So then we break that down into goals. I've got 2 kinds of goals. And one of the beauties of the toggles is we can open 2 categories together and see how they're aligned. So this is a little different than most people do goals. Most people have one type of goal. What I find is you need to have a goal that is measurable in order to know if you're moving toward it. And that's what I call the goal outcomes. And that's pretty common. But I find just trying to conceive of goal outcomes that are meaningful and resonate with the higher principles of what I'm working toward, it's kind of hard. These goal outcomes feel kind of transactional to me. In order to get my mind wrapped around it to develop the goal outcomes, I find it's helpful to start with value goals. So these are more aspirational, they're softer and easier for me to come up with. Like, I want a solid and growing financial footing. I want a thriving business. These are not measurable things. These are not actionable, but this is what I think of when I just start brainstorming on what I want my goals to be. So they're easy for me to come to. And then I say, well, I want a thriving business. What does that mean? That means I need to achieve these specific things. So I have 2 goals that are aligned. The value goals over here are linked. Each of these is a separate database. The value goals are linked to the goal outcomes in this column here. And the goal outcomes are all linked to the value goals. So every value goal has at least 1, sometimes more, goal outcomes, and every goal outcome has at least 1 value goal. But to me, it helps me think about it and come to better goal outcomes by going through this 2-step process.
I really like that. And I think, again, it like tying it back to the idea of rebooting is like, it's easy to have a whole bunch of stuff on our list that is not super important. And in times like this, where it's like, I only have this much energy, you can look at what really matters right now. How much energy do I have? Let's focus on the stuff that is pushing my values and goals forward, and anything else that's not aligned right now, it just has to go on the back burner. And we just kind of have to, we've only got so much to work with.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're setting priorities here too. I do have a priority setting, and these goals are either tagged as underway or waiting. It could be paused, it could be off track. If something's really going off track, I'm going to tag it that way because I want that red icon to be in front of me, or complete, and then it just rolls off the list. But not everything is underway at all times, and that what's underway can change as circumstances change. So we enter a global crisis. I might put some of these on pause. Waiting usually means they haven't started yet. Pause means it started, but then I stopped it. And underway, of course, means it's active. And you're constantly managing that, and you're making those decisions during the weekly or monthly reviews or the quarterly reviews. Day to day, you're focused on the tasks. The night before, you're lining up the next tasks. But in the weekly and monthly reviews, you're assessing which value goals should be active, and therefore which goal outcomes are underway versus not started. They're basically the 2 settings of a goal outcome that's in process. But you're constantly juggling these, and so I feel that 2-step process gets me to more meaningful goal outcomes. And then, of course, projects and tasks are pretty common. I do a lot of, again, linking across databases. So every project is linked, is linked to goal outcomes, linked to pillars, linked to action items below it. which gets a little bit cluttered. I don't really look at that from the project standpoint. So unless I'm opening the project and looking at all the tasks with it, but basically everything is aligned and connected. And the key thing here is when you look at a project, you need to know that it is serving something meaningful. Otherwise, you probably shouldn't be doing it. If you go to connect it to a goal outcome or a pillar, and it doesn't really fit any of them, then you need to ask yourself, should I be doing this project at all? Or is there a pillar I haven't identified that I should articulate? Because all of this is about being intentional and being deliberate in your actions. So you need to know what you should be working towards. And if you want to add a project that doesn't fit that, you need to really check why you're adding something that doesn't align. At the same time, projects need to have action items in order to progress. If a project doesn't have an action item, then it's orphaned, it's stuck, it's dead-ended. So this lets me at a glance know that there are action items, or sometimes called next steps, in place to move this forward. Otherwise, it shouldn't even be there. It shouldn't be active. So it lets me know if I finished an action item and didn't add a new one to advance the project. So during this review, at a glance, I can tell what's not progressing. And then, of course, the action items. So these are largely listed here so that I can reference them, but I wouldn't actually engage with the action items here. I'd engage with them in the action zone, which is my daily focus area. But everything else other than the action items, this is the dashboard in which I engage with these items. And then I have some quick link dashboards below, but those are just links. So happy to get into it, but the point is this pillar to pipeline pyramid is a action-oriented process flow. And the titling is because I use an organizational system called Pillar Pipelines and Vaults. So some people use Para. That's the other one that I developed specifically for Notion. And everything is either a pillar, which is those overarching structures that keep your world together. And also included in that would be, I just skipped over this, but the pillar support. So supporting the pillar are my habits and routines, which I have a database for, and I very deliberately identify them, the frequency, the time of day I'm going to execute them on a routine basis, what pillars they're supporting. I have research spaces dedicated to learning more about certain activities, and those are linked directly. And so I mean, I'm very deliberate about what my habits and routines are and what pillars they're supporting. Mindset is what I showed you before. It links to that page where I go through different parts of reflecting on how I can be better and become the person that'll be better at achieving the things I want to achieve. And health and fitness, I've got just track my workouts. Again, I want to see progress, and in a way that's gamification, both the daily tracking and the fitness, and even the progress trackers on the projects sort of gives you a sense of reward if you are achieving and delivering. The daily tracking, you'll see all the boxes on the habit tracker lined up, which is super rewarding. After a certain number of days, you don't want to break the chain. So not to deviate from even one day.
I've definitely felt that with the daily journal. Like I've just, it's been over, like a year and a half. Every single day I've got a journal, so I just can't break the chain.
Right.
But we got lots of questions.
Happy to follow.
Lots of questions that have popped in. Why don't we try and answer a couple, because there's been a couple highly voted questions that have come in as well. So Joshua asked, August, you stated in one of your videos that Para was designed for a pre-Notion world. What do you mean by this, and how has your system been adapted for this Notion world?
Trying to get into the controversial stuff, huh? No, if Para works for you, it's great. The most important thing is that you have an organizational system. Now, Para was literally designed in a pre-Notion world. So, I mean, I don't think that's actually that controversial. It can be adapted, as Marie and Kay and others have very, eloquently demonstrated. But I would suggest that the adaptations are as significant as the original Para itself. So I think those are kind of new innovations in and of themselves, what Marie does with Para and what Kay does with Para and all the Para users out there. But I did notice that Para was literally the only system anyone ever talked about, even in Notion, let alone in Evernote, where it was really designed for. And but here's what I mean by that, to get directly to your point. When the system was designed for Evernote and Dropbox and OneNote and Google Drive And those are kind of two-dimensional. There's a limit to what kind of functionality can be done with them. And really what it is knowledge management. It's organizing information resources so that you can apply it towards your thinking, which is great and super important. But that's not all Notion does. Notion does do that really well, but Notion also does project and task management. It does a lot of dynamic, more action-oriented stuff. Para was not designed for action-oriented stuff. I mean, Diago's explanation of it, it was basically filling in what GTD didn't do. So you've got the whole world of what GTD does, and then you've got the whole world of what Para does, and theoretically that's everything, although I think you can still find some gaps. But just on a very explicit level, Notion goes way beyond knowledge management into the action-oriented stuff. I mean, it's really good at managing action and what I call pipelines, processes, moving step by step through various processes, moving through this pyramid, quite literally. So Para was never even designed to do that. And so you can apply it, you can reinvent parts of it and expand it. Great, but I kind of wanted to start from scratch and just think clean using first principles. I like this idea of first principles thinking. Start with no assumptions. Just start with a blank page. Like if you were reinventing from scratch, how would you do it? And to me, it seemed like in Notion, everything falls into one of three categories. Most of them fall into the pipelines or vaults. So pipelines are, this is on the left side of my screen. If you want to put my screen back up on the far left there, let me even enlarge it a little bit. So I've got my organizational system over here under private. We've got the three arrows: pillars, pipelines, and vaults. Pipelines are the action, things that are moving and advancing and having action done on them. So you've got the action items, the projects, the goal outcomes, the value goals, which are just connected. That's more just tagging along with the goal outcomes. Accomplishments are things that are moving through a process and then the results of those processes. Same thing with disappointments. And the weeks, months, and quarters is reviewing the process flow of all these things. So all of those are assets within Notion that are basically action-oriented pipelines. Like Para doesn't actually do any of that. It's even though it has a projects category, the projects are really resources and information that supports projects. It's not the projects themselves. So like fundamentally, so Vaults is my knowledge management area. This is where I store the resources and information that helps me get smarter and helps implement the pillars and pipelines. So I've got a book vault, media vault, training vault, all kinds of stuff. And these are databases that store information. And the most interesting one is actually that's another dashboard. This is a whole other thing, but vaults is where you store the knowledge and information. And so you could actually put Para inside my vaults category, but I also think there are better ways to sort of tag and assign relations. And then pillars is like the aspirations, the things you're striving towards and who you want to become, and the things that support pillars. So with those three categories, I have everything that Notion does, and I'm not trying to sort of adapt something into Notion, although that's totally doable. And then I have a fourth folder called dashboards, which is basically pages that combine various aspects of pillars, pipelines, and vaults in conveniently theme-oriented configurations. So those four folders, I have a very clean organizational system. So that's basically what I meant. We could get into it more. On a Notion level, that's my issue with Para. I've got some other issues, but I mean, this.
Yeah, I hear that. And related to, like, Oldemar asked, one of my biggest concerns is getting crazy when creating databases and end up with a bigger mess than one has today. What's a good recommendation on this item? I mean, that's kind of a big question. And that's where I think having a system, you know which databases you're creating and why, is really helpful, and not just like data for data's sake. It's like, well, what are you trying to do? And that's where I think your system gives a bit more of a, you've got your pillar database, you've got your goals database. It's very clearly defined.
Actually, exactly. I'd also point out, I get that question a lot from people relatively new to Notion, but I want you to know, if you're new to Notion, with a little bit of practice and experience, you get to the point where a database is not intimidating at all. It's as easy as a page. In fact, it's in many ways easier than a page because it's not a blank page, something intimidating about a blank page. But it's actually easier for me to work with databases. So the fact that I have a lot of databases, anything that can go into a database, I put into a database because it has more power. You can organize and align and slice and dice, and then you can always go in and put a page inside it. it's not intimidating once you wrap your mind around it. So I would just encourage you to spend time playing with it, knowing you're going to get to a point where it's not chaos. It's just it's a really simple tool. It's not a complex tool. It just, you have to get to a point where you sort of digest it enough.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to be willing to play and, I mean, make a couple, sandbox pages where you're moving data around, maybe import some things from Evernote or whatever, and just kind of move your data around while you're playing with it to figure out the best structure. You kind of can't wait, I think, till you've got it perfectly laid out. It does require a bit of play, I think.
For sure. The database isn't inherently complex and chaotic. It can be very simple, but you need to get to a point where you just have worked with it enough that it's internalized.
Related to, someone was saying, like, how do you decide which of the systems is right for you? Example, getting things done, para, etc. And I think that kind of ties back to what you were saying earlier, when there's resonance and you're like, oh, that feels clear to me. Or like, I've seen so many different Notion setups, and some setups I've seen, I'm like, that feels like chaos and that hurts my brain, but I love that that works for you, right? And so I think you kind of have to find a little bit about what resonates, but I'd love to hear from you.
For sure.
How do you choose a system?
Yeah, a big factor is how much complexity do you need? Because some people need a lot of complexity and some people don't need much. And the answer is you need as much complexity as you need, but no more, right? The bare minimum of complexity that works. But that will actually vary. And GTD, I think very highly of GTD, even though I don't use it. There are elements of it in my system, but it's a very complex system and it requires a big commitment. And a lot of people don't need that big of a system, but some people do. It works really well if you commit to it. I think highly of it. But I have found, to me, I had a problem. This is how I found my system. Let me answer it that way. I had a problem with over scheduling every day because I'd have this huge list, this endless list that never even got anywhere close to finished. And it was just every day I'd move into the next day and had this huge list, and it was just overwhelming. And no matter how much I got done, I still have this weight of this massive list remaining. Like I saw no victories.
You feel guilty every day. Yeah.
Ocean and there's no reference of progress. So what I discovered by looking at a wide range of systems is that, to me, what's super valuable is to have a due date on every single thing. And now I don't have DUE dates, I have DO dates. A due date for me is a DO date, a date I plan to do something. And I will pull up my calendar, and I really love, oops, that's the wrong thing. I really love the calendar view in Notion. So I've got my daily view here, but I'm very frequently working in this calendar view. And this is the calendar view, not of DUE due dates, but of DO due dates. And I will, every single thing that goes into my task database, I assign a due date. And that's the date that I'm going to do something on that task. Now I could either do it, complete it, or the action could be reassigning it to another due date, but I'm going to consider it on that date. So first of all, that means I don't forget anything, but it also means I can assign it to a date that's not too crazy. And the night before I schedule the next day, but the only to-do list I'm looking at to schedule the next day is the things assigned that DO due date. So the list is relatively small on any night before. Now it might be longer than this because then I'll narrow it down if it's not realistic. But by putting it on your calendar, you have to make a judgment. Is it realistic for me to get this done on that day? And especially the night before, you particularly assess that. But even looking out, if I'm going to add a task, I'll look at the calendar and what day doesn't look too insane, and I'll assign that due date. And if that day gets crazier by the time I get to it the night before, then the night before I'll either push them out or I'll prioritize it. But when I'm prioritizing the next day, it has to look viable. Like, I mean, I may not succeed, but it has to be conceivable that I could finish that to-do list. And then many days I finish everything. Like I actually have a win with no endless list. So that to me just took such a weight off my shoulders. I knew this was a system for me. Now, some people might be comfortable with an endless to-do list. GTD kind of does lead to an endless to-do list, but it has good processes for managing it. So. Right. Yeah. So as you try and listen to things, you'll say, yes, I need that because I have this one problem and this addresses that one problem. But you need exposure to a wide range of ideas again.
Totally. And like Toran said in the sidebar, he said, I tried dating everything, but that didn't work for me. So I used this week and this month instead. So it's like, here are the things I know I want to get done this week. And that way that gives you that flexibility if like, oh, today went off the rails, or, you know, someone family called and I wanted to take that call or something. You don't feel that guilt of, oh, I didn't get my to-do list.
Yeah.
But that's what works for someone else, right? So that's the beauty of it, is you can like really design your own calendaring to-do system in a way that doesn't cause you more anxiety.
And that's perfect. Just try it. And if it's
Just
not
try
working, you will know. It will let you know if it's not working for you. That will be easy to discern. So at some point, you just got to try something and then see what's not working and then look for solutions to fix that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, right? And that's how your system gets better and better. So you can always refine those filters, refine those dashboards, just really make it as useful as possible for you. And I think you can't design that from the get-go in Notion. I think you use it a bit and kind of figure out, well, what are the parts that I liked about Asana or about Evernote or whatever. You can really kind of craft it. Again, plenty of YouTube videos out there, plenty of amazing office hours, especially around the weekly review as well. We've got lots around that. We actually have a Getting Things Done session Wednesday evening with Michelle from Channel Notes. She's got a really awesome YouTube channel. So she's in Australia, so we're going to be doing a very late night Pacific time next week. But yeah, there's still a couple more questions if you guys have time. If you've got time to stick around, August, I can.
Oh, I've got all the time.
Let's do it.
I'm here for the duration.
Awesome. There was a question that came in about, Nate said, what kind of review system do you have for improving your Notion setups? I'm curious, do you include that as part of a review, or are you tweaking kind of as you go?
It's not built in, but anytime I hit a friction point, just as a systems thinker and a system designer, it's in my nature to file off,
optimize, right?
So yeah. Anytime I'm hitting something that's a problem, I will work on solving that problem. So that's just inherent to the way I work. But if it wasn't, then I think that's a good idea to put it in a checkbox in one of your reviews. Assess Notion system, or list what were problem areas in my Notion build out. That would be a good thing to list, and then from those, add in my case, I'd put a due date action item to work on that.
Yep, I agree. I sort of do the same thing and just notice wherever there's friction. It's like, my to-do list or like my to-do dashboards, it's okay, but I find like I'm always kind of moving things to the next date. What's happening there, right? So it's just, and that's where I think that review, the daily review and a weekly review, is what's giving you that information of like, oh, there's friction here, there's friction here. Maybe my schedule is overbooked. Maybe I need to leave a bit of time to free up and give myself a bit more buffer, but you got to pay attention. And that's where I love the mindfulness of your whole system. It's all about very intentional action and paying attention to what you're consuming, what you're creating. So I really dig that.
You just hit the nail on the head. I mean, the friction makes itself known. That's the nature of friction, but you have to be open to it. You can be in a mindset where you just don't even notice it. You have to be open to sticking points. Like with a lot of clients, I'm looking for anything that they're doing repeatedly and how can we automate that? And that's in a lot of ways, I mean, the Notion is getting criticized a little bit for not having all the automations through the API, and someday, thankfully, we will have that. But it brings so much under the same umbrella. You get automations that internally that you would have previously had to link with duct tape and Zapier among applications. So it already does bring a lot of automation. But once we get the external connections, that'll be even more beautiful.
I love that you brought up that point too, because I've had clients where we've like automated so many things happening behind the scenes that I actually don't even know what is happening. And so there is an element of Notion where you're quite aware of all the things that you're putting in place. So there is a bit more intentionality required. That in some ways I don't mind that the API isn't like my system works for me. I have to put in that information, and it doesn't take that much time once you've got great templates in place.
There is so much you can already do, but a lot of it too is you can streamline the entry of inputs. I mean, part of systems thinking is thinking of how information comes into the system, and like all my daily tracking, it's in order from the way that it's presented to me, and it's very fast to enter. So you need to optimize those steps in your system.
And that brings you to another point where often people are like, oh, I don't like that there isn't like a quick add in Notion. It's like, oh, if you need a way to like quickly add notes to your Notion, create a quick add or an inbox or a dashboard that's favorite. Like you can always design for it. It's just knowing what the need is. And then you can say, great, I know that I need an inbox. Like that's going to be part of my process, right?
Exactly. I did a whole video on the quick add thing because I got so many people saying that. I just want to have a link I can say here.
There you go. Question answered.
So that's the thing though. Notion, you're designing the system and you can design it so that it's good for quick add or that it's bad for quick add. You can design it so that it's good for mobile or that it's not good for mobile. You're designing, you have a lot of control over those choices. And if quick add and mobile are important to you, you need to think about that in the table views and the dashboard design that you implement.
Absolutely. Joshua asked, August, what are your thoughts on Roam research? Although not as aesthetically pleasing and still in its early stage, which will fit better with your systems thinking approach?
That's funny. I had a semi-controversial tweet recently. I didn't even think it was controversial. I thought it was just a joke about how we productivity nerds obsess and debate and get into these little Twitter skirmishes about which one's better. And we're debating, which is the best way to work instead of actually working. And everybody thought it was funny, except the Roam crowd who took offense to it because but it's actually revealing. And I actually liked that response because I like the earnestness, like how seriously they take the reflection of how to optimize your thinking tools and your processes. So, I mean, I respect that, even though it surprised me because I thought it was just a light joke. And even Connor, the founder of Roam, jumped in on that. And anyway, it was fun. But I love the passion of the Roam cult, which is a big hashtag on Twitter. I think Roam's great. I think it's fantastic. I think it brings something that wasn't there, and it really empowers note-taking in a way that it never has been before. I don't think it replaces Notion. I don't think Notion replaces Evernote. I use Evernote, Roam, and Notion. But to me, Notion is the center of the universe. It is the foundation. It's the operating system. To me now, Evernote used to be a much bigger part, but it's, Notion's taken much of that, but it still has a role. And if you want, I can talk about how I use Evernote, but I still use it a lot in its specialty function. And Roam I see as having a specialty function, which is note-taking and digestion of what you're getting out of books and podcasts and just spontaneous thoughts you have. It is a really brilliant way to network all of these seemingly random pieces of ideas and information and connect them in ways you wouldn't have just naturally done on your own, which incidentally is how our brains work. So I love that neural network approach. To me, it's too random and ad hoc to work as a project or task management system, even though it looks like some people are trying to. I haven't been impressed with the task and project management, but the idea of connecting ideas is really powerful. And it kind of makes me wish that we could get that inside of Notion. Like the best of both worlds. You're always like taking the best features of any given thing and see how can we get them all in one? And it never quite works that way. But given that that's available and Notion's available and Evernote's available, I use all three every single day. But to me, Notion is the center of the whole operation, because you couldn't implement this kind of system, as far as I can see, in Roam. But Roam is so good at connecting ideas, and creativity comes from the connection of disparate ideas, right? It's pretty rarely a truly original idea. It's usually combining thoughts in novel ways. And so Roam is really good at that. So I definitely have taken to Roam to entering my spontaneous thoughts throughout the day or reactions to media that I interact with.
Right.
But I'll collect the media in Notion, and I'll link the work areas to tasks and projects and goal outcomes.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like I think I've been using my space in a way that mimics some of what Roam does. So I have like my journals connected to my notes and ideas, connected to my knowledge hub. I use a master tag database, so I can open up any tag and I can see every note that's related to that tag, and I can see every piece of knowledge, article, course I'm taking, and then I can also roll up other authors in the similar vein that are also talking about productivity, that are also talking about leadership. So I created or kind of mimicked, I think things that maybe happen in a more automated fashion in Roam, but I'm doing them a bit more like intentionally as I go, and I'm making some of those connections. And so over time, this system has become incredible. So if I want to who's talking about productivity? Who's talking about Notion? I can jump into that either. I can click on, I guess, Rally and people, or I can click on a Notion video, and all that information is actually connected in these beautiful hubs. So for me, that's enough for me to, like, it's working the way that I want it to work, and connecting up those ideas. So I personally don't have the interest in kind of diving into another tool, but I think it seems like amazing for research and note taking and really connecting those ideas. So I don't think it's an either or, like you said, but I've sort of mimicked some of the best parts of Roam in my space.
Well, there is a frustration with using both, right? Because one of the beauties of Notion is everything's connected, like you just highlighted. So the tasks are connected to the resources that fuel it. So there's a trade-off. There's a cost to moving something out of Notion, but in some cases, I think there's enough benefit to use both. So you have to assess the cost benefit.
Absolutely. Corey asked, I think it was Corey asked a question. Question for both Marie and August. Do either of you still handwrite? How does that fit into your digital system? I'd love to hear from you first, August, on that.
I'm just on the edge of debating whether to continue it, but I may. I have one aspect of my entire system that's handwritten, and that is what I just showed you in my daily actions when I hit the template at the bottom and it had morning startup and the evening wind down. Until like very recently, I would do that every day in a notepad, a beautiful leather-bound notepad with a fountain pen. So it's a special ritual. I give it elevates the importance of it. And it is true that handwriting internalizes better than typing into a computer. So the one thing that I would do in handwriting would be my one gratitude. I'm grateful for this. What would make today great? Not to do list specifically for today. I have a general one, but the specific for today, not to do list. And then the end of the day, today's wins and improvements, like 1 or 2 bullet points. I would do that in this notebook and have this beautiful collections of notebooks, because especially the what would make today great and the not to do list and the gratitude, I want to internalize that and just be connected to it in a more visceral way. And I think handwriting does that, especially in a beautiful pen and a beautiful notebook. And that's also the one piece of information I'm doing every day that's actually not that useful in aggregate later on in reflection, except with the exception of the improvement part, which I do duplicate into the system here. Right. Day to day, that information, what's going to make today great, is just too much information to look at in a monthly view. I look at what makes this week great in the monthly review, but not what every single day, all that fine daily detail at the monthly level. So I found that valuable, but I'm tempted to have it collected because there's something beautiful also about having this archive of your life.
Yeah, I like that.
So you have to choose what you want more. Is that the digital archive that you're never going to lose, or the experience of that visceral experience of handwriting, which I think is something to be said for that. You do internalize better.
So I personally don't take a ton of notes by hand, but I do have a Remarkable, which is pretty easy to export from Remarkable. It's very much feels like pen or pencil. And so I often will take course notes like that, or doodles, or anything that needs like a quick graph or drawing or whatever. And then I can just drag that into my daily journal or into a notes database. And so I have a couple course pages that have some extra doodles and whatnot in there, but for the most part, I don't use a ton of paper, if any. I don't think there's a single pen.
There's such an advantage for access.
Big time. Yeah, no, I love that. Someone asked what properties you have in your projects database.
Well, let's see. So projects. Let's go to a new project. So status, which is in progress, ongoing, waiting, on hold, someday maybe. That's someday maybe is an adoption of a GTD principle, and complete. I assign it to the quarter. I assign it a priority just to help sort it and give a quick glance of ranking. Review date. I always assign a date so that if I come to one of my reviews and the date is passed, I know I need to reassess that. It's very easy to let projects slip over time. And if you don't assign, it's not a due date because you don't always know, but it's a review date. And if that date is passed during my review, I need to spend some attention on it. It's connected to action items, which are the tasks, the goal outcomes, the pillars, The in-action workspace is the interesting vault that while most of my vaults are books or podcasts or all these different things, in action is organized by theme. And it's the theme for that given theme, maybe a new product development. I'll pull all the insights and ideas from all the other resources together under this topic and add my thoughts and add information from conversations. So this one's organized by topic or theme, and it's always a topic that I'm working on. So that's sort of like an in-action studio. I think of it as like a painter's studio on the paintings they're actually working on. Then notes, I always have notes, but I never use it. So maybe I don't need that. And then I assign whether it's the business personal or business personal, just so I can group them and have an easier digestion at a glance of the whole table. And then at the progress bar. So completed and goal creates the percentage there. And then some projects I won't have anything underneath it. Enter the template here. I have a pretty simple template here. I'll obviously have a table. I don't know what's filtered into this. So I don't want to scroll down, but the public demos. But but I'll filter it by the title of that. So the project contains the project we're in. So it'll filter only the tasks for this particular project, which is super helpful. And then for some projects, I'll use this workspace to actually develop and work on the project. And for others, I'll never use it. So it just depends on how involved that project is.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of the same in terms of how much detail gets put in there.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll share it with others and we'll work on a project together.
So some of these questions might be bigger and open-ended, and a few people answered that. Go check out August's videos on YouTube. They'll get into more detail about that.
Section by section, I have a video on each. That's the whole point of my channel, is to break this down.
Perfect. So yeah, Eric asked about the pillars, pipelines, vaults. Can you expand on it and how they're best suited for Notion? So I think going to the YouTube videos would be a good.
I haven't done that one yet, but it's coming.
Okay, cool.
Parts of it. But it's really simple. I mean, it's just 4 folders with dashboards, and it lets you store the assets. It's not fundamental to the function of the system. It just keeps my left column very organized and not cluttered with a lot of stuff. So, and each asset in Notion is fundamentally either a pipeline, meaning it's something that action is flowing through, or it's a vault, which is something stored, or it's a dashboard, which is an aggregation of them. And then I just separate pillars as a special one because these are the North Stars of my life and my world.
Related, Natasha asked, how do you remind yourself to go back and check in on these guiding principles? I find that I like defining and finding the principles, but then I just forget about it.
Well, we have cycles and weekly reviews and monthly reviews.
Always comes back to the review. Yeah.
It's so important. And if I go new here and I add my new template, I used at one point I need to relabel that. This is guiding principles.
But that's where, again, you're perfectly illustrating, like, your templates are crafted to make you remember and see the things that are most important to you. So if reviewing that is part of your week, it's baked right into your template, right? Yeah.
And so, I renamed it. So the very first thing I do in a weekly review, now I'm not changing them here, I'm reviewing them. I have to check that off. But it means I not only need to periodically see if there are changes, but I need to live up to them. I need to have them front and center in my life. I can't forget about them. That'd be so easy to forget about. Yeah. So I will review it every week. I will just read it. It's short. I mean, the conclusion from the review is the guiding principles. It's short on purpose so that I can read it every week and not forget it. And as I'm reading it any given week, if something seems off, if I see my life has changed or the world around me has changed, and it's no longer relevant, well, it'll be immediately obvious. And since it's so short, it'd be pretty easy to tweak a word or two here. But tweaking a word or two in your guiding principles has a profound effect because everything is aligned underneath it and behind it. So that'll change priorities in your goals and your projects.
Absolutely. Love that. Great answer. I know another one was related to the system, which it sounds like you're going to be doing some YouTube videos around that with the pillars, pipelines, and vaults. How do you deal with tasks that aren't tasks, like reading a book, for example? How does the system let me see that I want to have a certain book read in a month, since it's something that takes more than what a task is designated for?
It is, the way I do that is pillar supports have habits and routines. So reading would be a habit, or it might be learning. You might set I set a certain amount of time aside every day for learning, and usually that means reading. It could be certain video watching. Just gotta be careful that it's a learning video, not just any old video.
Yeah.
That's a rabbit hole. But I have usually an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours set aside every day. That is just part of my routine, and I will, during that hour and a half, put myself towards some kind of learning, and usually it's reading. Usually it's one of the books I have going on. So you need to make that one of your routines. If it were super important and there were actually a hard deadline, like you needed to have it read before you had a certain meeting, then I'd put it in a due date as an action item in my task list. Then it would be like an actual item to schedule. But otherwise, I just fill that hour and a half to 2 hours of reading and learning with whatever is the priority in my reading list.
Love that.
And so it becomes a habit or routine, not a task. But again, unless it's a priority with a really hard completion date.
I really like that.
Yeah, a lot of things that are just routines, you don't need to assign as tasks unless
Right.
they have a hard deadline. You just make them routines, make them a steady part of your daily process. So you have part of your day assigned to working on tasks, and part of your day is assigned to doing these habits and routines.
And that's why I think having, like, just knowing what those pillars are and those commitments are, because I know, like, learning is a big part of my business too. I'm always taking courses, reading books. There's always something on the go, but I'm trying to make sure it's aligned with a common goal that I have right now, or a project that I have right now. So those are the top priority things that I'm consuming.
And if you don't schedule that time, you won't do it. Like, that's the easiest stuff.
Yeah.
Why? Like, there's the urgent and there's the important, and they're often not the same thing. The urgent has like deadlines imposed by external forces, like pay your bills. But paying your bills isn't going to get you ahead in life. It's necessary, but if you only do those externally imposed reaction-oriented activities, and you don't carve out and actually schedule on your calendar time for things that are important but not urgent, you're not going to move forward. So you need to actually carve this. If you're having trouble with this, then go beyond the Notion calendar and do a Google Calendar. The night before, instead of mapping out your priority list in Notion, take the task list in Notion, assign sections in your Google Calendar for the next day to do work on tasks, and assign other blocks. It's called time blocking. Create other time blocks for routines like learning and reading, and map out every waking hour of the day, including meals, including time with your spouse and your family, including fun time, like relaxation time, social media time, and reading time. Do that every day, schedule it the night before, and you're going to be like a machine getting things done.
I definitely do that too, where I sort of have pre-scheduled like deep work time, and I call it brain time. So it's just like time devoted to growing your learning, whatever that looks like. And there's little blocks every day, even if they're small. There's like one thing at least every day.
That's totally how you do it. That's 100% the way.
What books have you read that have influenced your systems?
Oh, a lot of books. Actually, it's funny, as I was doing this, I was thinking of who influenced the system, which led me to thinking like who influenced my philosophy more, because the system kind of comes out of your philosophy.
Yeah.
So I actually was jotting lists down. So obviously there are a lot of Notioners influenced the system. Maria, you have been huge, but William Nutt and Kahee and lots of people in the Notion Pro community. But people like Tim Urban has been hugely influential. He writes a really elaborate blog called Wait But
Why?
Yeah. He had an amazing piece on procrastination, which I recommend to anybody, which I think turned into a TED Talk. Who has a huge impact on me is Eckhart Tolle. That's where a lot of my meditation stuff comes from, just on a more philosophical level. But I try to bring that presence, that idea of being in the moment to my system. That's why I have such a massive focus on my daily action zone, which is where I spend the vast majority of my time in here, because it's what matters now. But beyond that, Jocko Willink has actually been great on my mindset and thinking in terms of action-oriented, systems. David Goggins, similarly. David Allen, for sure, has had a huge influence. Even though I don't use GTD, he created GTD. I don't use it explicitly. There are many parts of it in my system. Anders Ericsson, who wrote the book Peak, which is about these building mental models. So I try to build feedback loops that facilitate the creation of mental models, which makes me perform better. James Clear wrote the book Atomic Habits. One of the two best books on habits. The other is Charles Duhigg. He also wrote a book on habits. Those two books. I'd start with James Clear if you want to start with one. But that's about building the routines and systems and processes that make you, by nature, the person you want to be. And those are fundamental to the systems I'm doing here, trying to internalize and shape identity. Ultimately, to be the person you want to be, you have to make it part of your identity. It can't be a chore to read or to write. I say writing because that's even harder. You have to just think of it's not like if it's a task list item and you're begrudgingly doing it, it's not going to happen routinely. And it's what you do every day that makes a difference, that gets you somewhere meaningful. It has that cumulative impact. And in order to do that, you have to internalize it. You have to become that. You just have to, it's not like you have the chore of writing, it's that you are a writer. Like you need to accept and believe that that's who you are. And the way you get there is by creating a routine. Like you do the habit and you do it enough, and eventually you just believe that's your identity. That's who you are. So the idea is to get to the point of it being part of your identity, processes, habits, and actions, and that's what this whole system is designed to facilitate. Greg McKeown is another one. So there are a bunch of authors and content creators there that have massively shaped my thinking that has all gone into the system.
Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting earlier, like we had a mix of people being like, oh, I love the philosophy, and people being like, more Notion. And I just thought that was so interesting, right? Because again, I don't think your space is not going to be as valuable or useful without a reason, right? Like everyone's dashboard looks different because the things that they want to highlight and make important in their lives is different. And so I do think that sort of background and context is very important when you're designing your systems, and it's relevant because people are asking, okay, this is great, and then like, how do I actually start? Like we had 2 questions come in that were like, okay, where would you recommend starting over with Notion from a beginner level? How do I create everything from scratch or modify these templates, right? So I'm curious, like all of this aside, like now someone's like, okay, where do I begin now?
Great question.
Right?
Just briefly, before we had the question about the tables becoming chaos, that's what happens when you don't have a philosophy behind it, when you don't have like a sort of an understanding of what you want to achieve. So you need the philosophy to build the system, because that's what brings clarity to what should and should not be in the system. So I think thinking deeply about these issues of how to achieve what you want to achieve is fundamental to building a Notion system. I don't see them as disconnected at all. But to the question of how to start, I think it's pretty clear. You start by reflecting and understanding. I would first start with guiding principles and going through the reflection that is typically shared during annual reviews, but it doesn't need to be an annual review. So go through this deep reflection of who you are and what you want to achieve in your life, what's working for you, what's not working for you, and just get a sense of what you value and where you want to go. And then I would just start by laying that out, documenting that just on a page. So it's nothing fancy, very simple, and doesn't require any serious Notion skills. Just make some pages and document them and organize them in a simple linked dashboard. When you start to build the system, I think you got to start with the task database. You need to start at the detail level, at the bottom most detailed level. Build the task database, then build a dashboard that the task database is easy to interact with. You see here I have this action zone, which is by far my most used page. I have all these different interpretations or views of my task database. Now I could make different views in the table itself, but I choose to lay them out in a dashboard with different toggles so I can open them side by side and do different combinations, work with different combinations together. I also find it easier to open than a toggle here than in the table view. But also importantly, it reminds me to look at other ones because it's easy to forget. You don't have a reminder on the different views. And I so often have other views that I never use because they're not front and center. But by having these toggles in a dashboard of many views of the same database, it reminds me, okay, I gotta keep an eye on tomorrow. I gotta keep an eye on the upcoming week. I gotta keep an eye on what I'm waiting on. So anything with a waiting on check is here. These are the things I'm waiting on other people. But this reminds me to check my waiting ons, things that I'm stuck, I can't advance until someone else does something. And if it takes too long, then I need to take it off the waiting list and assign a due date to follow up with them. But by having it laid out this way. So first build a task database, then build a dashboard. And I think the calendar view is so powerful. Build a dashboard that presents that task database in all the relevant ways, and just start with using it as basically a to-do list. And then after that, you build the projects so that you can link your tasks that are advancing projects to the projects, then attach it to the goals. Now, the way you think, once you have the system together, I think from the top down, so that the tasks flow out of the principles and out of the higher level elements. But when you're building it, I think it helps to build it from the bottom up, because you can start using it today once you have a task database. And then as you add pieces, you use more and more of it.
Love it. Someone was asking what your system was before, like what was your system before you started using Notion? And I'm even curious, like what were some of the primary tools you were using before Notion?
Well, because all tools prior to Notion define the system, I use Todoist and Evernote for most of what I'm doing here. And Trello. I use Todoist, Evernote, and Trello. And so I did what those apps do. My system was basically conforming to those apps. And then I discovered Airtable and got excited about the idea of creating apps. And then I realized, whoa, Notion does that, but a whole lot more.
And more visual.
I mean, Airtable is awesome. And in the era with Notion not having APIs, Airtable fills that gap. I mean, that's the big thing there. But once Notion gets that API, I don't know what I'll be doing in Airtable so much.
Yeah.
There are advantages to Airtable, but the gap's closing. But yeah, so I use Todoist, Trello, and Evernote, and you can do a lot on those apps. I mean, they're great. I love Todoist, and I love Trello, and I like Evernote. But putting them together and then customizing the flow between them is just groundbreaking. So that's where I am.
Stephen was asking, could you say in a sentence what Evernote does in your view?
It does. I mean, now that I have the Notion system and I use it with Evernote.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, before it did a lot more, but it's doing less and less. But okay, so to me, so Evernote's about storing information resources that you might want to use. Notion now does that too. So the distinction for me is information that is connected to an active project or task or something I'm actively working on is in my vaults in Notion. Anything I'm storing because I might, maybe, potentially, who knows, someday want it, I just dump into Evernote. So it's my bottomless shoebox, the giant pit that I throw things that I might want to find later. And Evernote has good search, and it has pretty good machine learning recommendations. So it helps bubble stuff up kind of arbitrarily or ad hoc. So it's helpful to find it. If I just try to remember where it was on the web, I'm less likely to find it and be able to search my Evernote inbox. And I do have a good tagging system and a good notebook system. So I can usually find stuff if I remember it's there. If sometimes I'll open up a new project in Notion, I'll just search some keywords in Evernote to see what I've stored on that topic, and then I'll move them over to Notion. But the capture is really good in Evernote. It's still pretty good in Notion. I think that gets a bad rap. I think the difference between the article capture is not that big. Evernote lets you tag it, which Notion doesn't. But so big giant shoebox dump for maybe someday I might want this, versus I'm actively working on this kind of thing and I want it attached to my projects.
Yeah, great answer. That makes sense. Oh, a couple more questions popped in. Do you do too much tagging on your system?
And I do a lot of tagging in Evernote just because it's all about finding it later. I don't do a ton of tagging. I may do some. I'll sort it by categories. I mean, I try, no more than necessary. Like the least amount that gets the job done is ideal. When I have multi-selects, I don't want to have like a crazy long list. So, I mean, at the biggest, I'd have 6 or 7, usually like 3 to 5. It's really helpful. But it's about sorting and organizing, especially in Notion where you have it in tables. I love table view because it provides the most information in the smallest amount of screen real estate. So I do a lot with table views, and not a lot with Kanban unless I'm actually looking for a flow. Like my content pipeline is all on a Kanban, but I look at my today list here in table view because you get the just densest concentration of information in a list form, and I use the tags just to sort the list. and have it in an organized way that at a glance you can understand and access it.
I dig it. Yeah, there's honestly so many elements of your space that well, time to tweak my setup, time to add those, those pillars, those, the mindset stuff. There's some really, really good stuff in there that I'm definitely going to be taking away.
Well, I'm flattered you say that, because I've learned so much from your system as well.
I think that's how it goes in the community, right? When you share kind of what's working and what you figured out, it like sparks new ideas. And I think that's what's so fun too about the community is like there's so much creativity available and people finding interesting ways to use the tool in ways that maybe we hadn't thought of. And
absolutely, it is such a great community tool. It's such a great community too. I don't ever remember being in a community of software, people passionate about software like this. I mean, they're out there, but they tend to be very practical, like just solve your problem. Yeah. This is a group of people who are just on fire about it. And I think this goes back to this being about building your own system, not just adopting a system presented to you. It's a creative endeavor, fundamentally.
Did I ever think that I'd be like spending the majority of my time raving about a software? No, that was not in the plan, but I'm just so activated by what is possible with it. So it's just really neat.
It's more like Lego building blocks or clay rather than a finished tool. So that's absolutely all the difference. It's a creative act, creating your Notion system.
Someone said, question for Marie. Now that you're saying about tweaking your setup, is that very hard to redo once you've developed a system? I think I'm too worried about making it perfect and afraid if I need to be changes. I change it constantly. Like I'm always tweaking it. And it's so easy to change the way you view something, move data around, embed databases in different ways. I would definitely say don't be worried about like the system's never perfect. It's kind of always in a state of is this helping me do what I need to do right now? If not, if there's friction, I can tweak it. I love the mindfulness and intentionality that August has brought, and so that's where I want to make that stuff less buried. Like I have links to it's like a compass, right? Like my own personal compass and my own manifesto, and I have some things in there. But I like the way yours is even more brought into your weekly agenda. So I'm not massively changing my system, but I'm making these small tweaks that just make what is most important more visible in better ways. And sometimes it means adding a page. Sometimes it means linking to databases, and I could change my mind if I think that's over-engineered and I want to break the connection. I can totally do that. So I think you got to, I think, be willing to kind of adopt that learning mindset and say, like, there's no perfection here. It's just a system to help you be more awesome. And if there's ways to make it more awesome, then do so. And if something's not helping you, let go of the need for it to be perfect. Yeah. That's my spiel on that.
There was a great question that sparked a lot of thought in the Notion Made Simple Facebook group. The question was, I keep trying to perfect my system. When do I know it's perfect and able to use? And you actually had great comments in there. And I was like, how do you know it's perfect if you aren't using it? It's like, that's the definition of perfection, is that it works in real life.
It's fascinating, yeah, to design something before you use it. To me, it's almost like you use it and the system develops out of that use case. Because the more you use it, the more you're like, oh, you know what I need? I need a space for those quick capture ideas, or I need a place for project ideas that aren't fully formed yet that might need a back burner. Or maybe I need a back burner status or a back burner page, or it's all just like designed for different problem solving. It's what are the use cases that don't have a place to live? Well, let's create a container for that. And is there a similar container that's going to help support that? So it does require a little bit of problem solving, but I find that fun is to kind of give those things order. But start with a brain dump, even if it's one page where you're just dumping text. It doesn't have to be fancy. I think start simple and notice where you're using things. Don't wait till the system is perfect before you begin using it.
Absolutely.
Do you have a recommendation for the process of identifying your pillars?
Oh, yes, and part of it is the self-reflection. The process of identifying the guiding principles. It flows out of the guiding principles. Now, some of them are just going to be practical. Like I have, business admin and personal admin, right? So those are kind of catch-alls for, got to pay the bills. I got to do, my accounting, some basic stuff, right? And you don't need like a fancy aspirational pillar for that. but it has to get done or you're going to have problems. Like the roof isn't going to stay up, lights aren't going to stay on if you don't have that pillar, on a solid foundation. Others, like health, you might be more aspirational, or maybe even recovering from something, family. They're the foundations of your life. I mean, think about them. Just it's basically a list, right? So just make a list. And
it's like only you know what matters most in your life,
Right. I have them in a database, but it's just a list. And then it's nice having them in a database because then you can connect them to everything else. But all it is a list of maybe 12 things or so. And what matters, if you combine, some people just use Notion for personal, some use it for business. If it's business, you might be more creative. I've got something called branding and audience. I've got client execution, product development. So that's going to vary depending on what your business is. But the life ones, the personal ones, I mean, everybody would have family, home, home maintenance, taking care of your home, personal admin, which would be like, bills and just basic stuff that has to get done. But if you don't get that done, your world's not going to be in order and you're going to have problems. So it is a pillar, but some are more exciting than others. Learning is probably the most exciting one of all my pillars, but it's pretty basic stuff. It's the cornerstones of your life that are just always present.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it start with a brain dump, right? What are all the things I'm responsible for? And what are all the things that matter? What are the things you're committed to? And I'd love to see, any additional YouTube videos that come out of this, whether you want to elaborate more on the pipeline and your process. Cause it sounds like there was like still more questions.
Yeah, for sure.
In fact, go even deeper.
I mean, it's good. My next video is on this alignment dashboard myself. I haven't even done the alignment dash. So this is new content that's not even on my channel yet. But this weekend I'll come out with the alignment dashboard alignment zone video, because it's actually nice. It's all cleaned up now for public viewing, so I might as well take advantage of that. Right. And then I'm going to go in section by section with the video on the projects database, and the video on the goals databases, video on the pillars, and then a video on the review, on the cycle reviews and all that. So the whole channel is just, the first one was an overview of all of it, and then I'm going through section by section in greater detail. That's the whole concept of my YouTube channel.
That's awesome. Yep. I think that's great because you could go, very deep into any one of these particular sections. And
I try to bring some of the conceptual and philosophical concepts to it that are relevant for anyone, even if you're not using Notion, but I'm connecting them specifically to Notion.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. I think the philosophy side and sort of the explanation and the context is super important. So not just like how to, click this button here on Notion. There's lots of videos like that kind of show you that level of just getting the basics of Notion. And I think what we're trying to do here in this case is also like, how can we apply to these bigger ideas? What does this look like in action? So so plenty of YouTube videos to come. I'm sure there's going to be lots. I just love seeing everyone's different system and what it looks like in their lives.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, you learn about people by looking at their systems too.
It's like you're seeing under the hood, but it's like their brain at work, right? I just love it.
We're better or worse. You're share something like this.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I know we should probably wrap it up. It's been 2 hours. Thanks for everyone. There's like, I think 130 people here who are with us right now. So thanks everyone for sticking it out and for
amazing. And this community is just fascinating. But thank you, Marie, so much. It's been such a privilege and honor to be on the show with you. I've learned so much from the series and from your work. So thank you.
Anytime. Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good one. In August, maybe we'll have to follow up with a future session and go even deeper on some of this stuff.
Anytime. There's so many other things. I mean, there's so much we haven't touched on. So anytime.
I know. Thanks. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for coming. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye for now.
Bye.